Arden Phair is a local historian and former curator at the St. Catharines Museum. He was born and raised in St. Catharines and graduated from Brock University and Niagara College. His most recent major activity was initiating a project to honor 138 workers who died in the building of the Welland Ship Canal. This community-wide project resulted in the unveiling of a $1.2 million memorial at Lock 3 and many other special recognitions for the workers. Arden enjoys exploring family history and taking little-known aspects of local history and discovering their stories. One of these stories is that of the Standard's editorial cartoonist. So sit back and enjoy Arden's presentation. The pun is mightier than the sword.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you to John as well for helping with all the technology. I'm technologically challenged, so it's most appreciated. Just as a bit of an introduction, my interest in this specific topic was piqued a couple of decades ago with the discovery of a front page, where we go here. Discovery front page article about the hiring of a full-time editorial cartoonist at the St. Catharines Standard. And for a small regional paper, this was a pretty remarkable thing. That first artist cartoonist was Josh Silburt. And in succeeding decades, as I was doing research, every now and again, I'd see another cartoon and it would be something with a distinctly local flavor like this one, the editorial or the mayoral candidates. Here's Charles Daly and this is Fred Wary. And just sort of make a note of them. This is by Rubin Kaell, who used the pen name James Allen. And then discover another one. Here's John Smith after he's been elected mayor, and they're presenting with all the issues that are coming up with clean up the old canal, and they need a new swimming pool and move the market. And this was by Johnny Ednie. And then another one I found, this was one, Harley and lots fronting on Lake Ontario. Again, it just sort of gets me wondering this pattern of individuals. And then another one by Marten, which turns out to be Harold Marten, and again, a local cartoon. And actually, during the course of the research for this project, then I became aware of another one signed Pratt. Once I discovered this cartoon where you can see Alderman Wallace and Alderman Ball, they're getting up ready to trying to move the market from Market Square. So these 6 cartoonists, I have not gone through the standard for every day for 25 years. So there may actually be others out there. And like I say, the most recent one that I found was Charles Henry Pratt, who was here for about a little over a year, but did well over 100 cartoons during his time here. Now, unfortunately, their stories are all going to have to be compressed to fit everything in the next 45 minutes. Given the time constraints, the presentation will be showing a sampling of their cartoons while I narrate a voiceover about their lives and careers. The narrative will not necessarily be about what you are seeing on the screen at a given point. However, the cartoons displayed in each chapter of the presentations for specific cartoons will be illustrations by only that cartoonist. So I hope you can process both my audio and the visual of what you're seeing. If there are any questions or comments, I'd ask that if you could please leave them till the conclusion of the presentation. It is only appropriate to begin this story of editorial cartoonists with a salute to the St. Catharines Standard and its publishers. My appreciation for the Standard as a quality newspaper continues to grow the more that I learn about the successive improvements introduced by every generation of the progressive Burgoyne family. Day after day for 105 years, they delivered on the promise of quality. In 1996, the Burgoyne era came to an end when the paper was sold to Conrad Black in the Southern Empire. Going back to 1936 and the 25 years that followed, the paper's editorial cartoons were yet another innovation for this mid-sized regional newspaper. The artists presented a new perspective of world and local events and the people in power through their one-cell cartoons, which appeared on the page 4 editorial page of the St. Catharines Standard. I love some of these things. You could publish this today and it'd be just as relevant as it was back in 1937. St. Catharines is a fine place to live if you can find a place to live. Or over here, try and rent a home in this town right now. So it just rings very familiar. The cartoons were also used as a medium to focus on the softer side of local issues, activities, and personalities. 30 miles an hour sure going on some St. Catharines street. Did you see in today's newspaper where they've agreed to reduce the speed limit on a multitude of city streets? All of this is just still very current. In their own charming manner, the cartoons were almost akin to community billboard announcements. But that was fine with the Burgoynes and pleasing to subscribers of the home paper of the Niagara Peninsula. Here, Jack Silburt gets to really exhibit some of his artistic talents in talking about the annual horse show. Firstly, what is an editorial cartoonist? Briefly, an editorial cartoonist typically combines the skills of an artist with hyperbole and satire in order to question authority or to draw attention to political matters or to the social ills of society. Cartoonists use an exaggerated caricaturist style to capture the likeness of a politician or the main subject. Humor, wit, and satire are embraced to lampoon an individual or group, to comment upon a particular event, or to emphasize the cartoonist's point of view. The message can reflect the artist's personal opinion or perhaps the position of the newspaper. Column after column of text on an editorial page can be daunting to the reader. The editorial page is enlivened by inserting illustrations or cartoons. Cartoons definitely help to engage the reader and maybe encourage them to delve more deeply into an accompanying article or issue. In many cases, they serve a purpose as thought-provoking visual studies of an issue. With respect to the title of this presentation, The Pun is Mightier Than the Sword, it is a catchphrase borrowed from the satirical magazine Grip, which used the proverb, as they revised it, in the late 1870s and 1880s. I pay homage to its publisher, John Wilson Bengough, who excelled at political cartooning in 19th century Canada. In 1936, the Standard established their own engraving plant for the printing of pictures. No longer would engraving plates have to be outsourced for this particular press production process. An art department was established in conjunction with the new engraving department. To quote the front page announcement on Wednesday, November 25th, 1936, it was, "In keeping with the forward policy of progress with this newspaper, the engagement of a competent artist and cartoonist in the person of Jack Silburt, who will provide a new art department with timely sport and political cartoons." And here's his first assignment, which shows Premier Mitch Hepburn, who had just sent a telegram to the Standard, correcting the Standard on a point of information. Josh, or Jack as he was commonly known, was only 22 when hired by the Standard. His previous experience included doing editorial cartoons for Maclean Hunter trade journals and sport cartoons for the Central Press Canadian. Josh Silburt was born in 1914 in Plum Coulee, Manitoba. After a few years, the family moved to Winnipeg, where the Jewish population was rapidly growing. By the way, that cartoon again, everything's still the same. This is Hepburn and one of his election platforms about reduced prices on license plates for 1938. Again, sort of sounds familiar. Silburt could not afford to pursue an art degree at college. However, in 1932 and 1933, he attended night school classes at the Winnipeg College of Art. At this time, the school's principal was Lionel Lemoyne Fitzgerald, who became a member of the Group of Seven in 1932, when Silburt was there. Fitzgerald's influence would be evident later in life in much of Silburt's art. By the way, you'll see many characters repeated in, he's got John Bull, who's representing Great Britain, and he's got Uncle Sam and Jack Canuck. While growing up in Winnipeg, Silburt became lifelong friends with his backyard neighbor, Jack Kaell. Jack's older brother, Rubin, was also an aspiring artist with an interest in cartooning. Silburt was greatly influenced by Rubin, who had studied cartooning by correspondence. Rubin Kaell left for Toronto and had some success with freelance work. He sent word back that there were opportunities in the big city. Kaell's example prompted Silburt to also study cartooning by correspondence. In 1934, he too left for Toronto. For about a year, Silburt tried to make a living there by drawing portraits of business executives. He then concentrated on freelance sport cartooning and editorial cartoons. For each, he would receive a fee of $15 to $25. When you compare some of Silburt's sport cartooning, it's just second to none. It's as good as any of the material coming out of the big syndicates in the States. Josh Silburt channeled his youthful idealism into politics and joined the Young Communist League, which had many Jewish members. Josh also participated in the 1935 On to Ottawa trek of the unemployed. Around 1934, Josh Silburt was introduced to the Rudney family in Toronto through Jack and Rubin Kaell's oldest sister, Goldie. Josh courted Beth Rudney, the eldest of 5 children of Joshua and Dina Rudney. Beth's next youngest sister in age, Hilda, would later marry Rubin Kaell, further linking these 3 families. Silburt's full-time job as a cartoonist at the Standard paid $17 to $20 per week. If you can imagine, that's about $19,000 or $20,000 per year now in today's dollars. This was at a time when Beth Rudney, now his fiancée, was earning about $125 a month at her job as a bookkeeper in Toronto. In addition to his regular task of editorial cartooning, Silburt also drew another feature called Niagara District Greats in Sport. This provided Silburt with the opportunity of really showcasing his artistic talents. An additional feature that he illustrated was a collage of news vignettes from the previous month. During this period, Silburt hitchhiked or bused back and forth to Toronto, where his social and family life remained. By the way, this is one of his cartoons. This is on the eve of the opening of the City Hall, opening the new City Hall with so many speeches, etc. If you can believe, there were 19 formal speeches to be given on that day, plus all the singing of hymns and prayers and presentations. Silburt stayed with the job at the Standard for 14 and a half months before he quit over frustration at the meager salary and the fractured lifestyle. His last cartoon appeared in the paper on February 8, 1938. Between 1939 and 1941, Silburt attended evening art classes at the Ontario College of Art. Art studies at Central Technical School also kept him busy. Again, these very localized cartoons, which I think are just absolutely charming, are a real reflection of what was happening in the community. Beginning in 1942, Silburt's cartoons were regularly appearing in the country's large circulation newspapers, including the Toronto Daily Star, Toronto Telegram, the Globe and Mail, Hamilton Spectator, Winnipeg Free Press, and Vancouver Sun. His cartoons that deal with the war years had developed an accomplished illustration style and refined messaging that were among his best. 1943, Josh Silburt and Jack Kaell enlisted in the armed forces during the Second World War. Silburt's artistic skills were put to use designing sets and costumes for Wayne and Schuster comedy shows for the troops. Silburt's Jewish heritage was a problem for at least one employer. In early 1946, the Hamilton Spectator published a series of Silburt's editorial and sport cartoons. He was offered the full-time placement, but after completing the job application, the position was suddenly no longer available. Silburt believed it was because he had stated Jewish on the religion portion of the form. This sort of discrimination was not uncommon in Canada at the time, where anti-Semitism presented many barriers for Jews in employment, education, and other areas. If one door closed for Silburt, then another one opened. The Sydney Post-Record in Sydney, Nova Scotia was seeking a staff cartoonist. Silburt was offered the position at $75 a week. It was February 1946. It came at a personal sacrifice, though. He lied about his religion on the Sydney job application. This time he stated Christian. A miners' strike in Sydney, which began in February 1947, drew national attention as it stretched on for months. Tim Buck, the head of the Canadian Labour Progressive Party, the Communist Party, visited Sydney in early April. When the Post-Record learned that their staff cartoonist had hosted Buck at a dinner at his home, Silburt was promptly fired by the paper. Revealing his political sympathies had cost him his job. His last cartoon appeared in the Sydney Post-Record on April 18, 1947. Silburt's return to Toronto from Cape Breton would signal a new beginning. In the 1950s, he transitioned from the very public world of political cartooning to the very personal realm of landscape painting. He finally got to do what he had always yearned for, creative expression on his terms. He would go on to capture the rugged landscapes of Algonquin Park, Haliburton, Algoma, and the west coast of scenic Canada. Though Silburt had published over 1,000 political and sport cartoons in the 1930s and 1940s, before his death in 1991, one of his greatest satisfactions was reconnecting with his fine art. And if you'd like to learn more about Josh Silburt, I would like to put a plug in for his book by his son, Alan Silburt, A Color for Life, fabulous hardcover, color, well-illustrated publication that has much of his artwork, but many cartoons. The second cartoonist of this presentation is Rubin Kaell, who would go on to become the Standard's longest-serving staff cartoonist and artist. He was employed there for almost 7 years between October 38 and August 1945. By the way, 1941 was the 50th anniversary of the paper, and here's Rubin right down front here. Kaell was born in Winnipeg on October 3rd, 1913. He moved east to Toronto in the early 1930s, followed by two brothers and a sister. At first, he was trying to make his way as an artist. After Josh Silburt left the Standard, there was a 9-month gap until the hiring of Rubin Kaell. His first cartoon appeared October 4th, 1938, and dealt with the recovery of business in the late 1930s. You can see they're worried about war fears here and trying to get world statesmen to allay those fears. With being 1938, there was a great fear of what was happening in Europe. This was something that was apparently reliant upon world statesmen being able to put down fears of a potential war. It also tied into an editorial that day focusing on the Munich Agreement, whereby a settlement had just been reached with Germany to permit the German annexation of the Sudetenland, which was a part of Czechoslovakia. Rubin Kaell and Hilda Rudney were married 3 months after he started at the Standard. Something about these first two cartoonists. Josh Silburt was married December 27th, 1 month after he started, and Rubin and Hilda were married 3 months after, December 25th. For the first couple of years at the job, Kaell stayed on his own at the Y during the week, heading back to Toronto on weekends. Again, here's this whole St. Catharines population, the housing facilities, everything is just stretched to the maximum. Rubin Kaell published his cartoons under the pen name James Allen, and later referred to himself as Robert or Bob. For those of Jewish descent, anglicizing one's name made things a bit easier in Canadian society. Again, a good cartoon, depending on whether you're in favor of the election candidate or opposed to him, you're either putting a halo on him or pinning a devil's tail to him. 1939, Kaell was interviewed by a fellow Standard staffer, Ron Gadsby. And this is representing an event from Kaell's early schooling in Manitoba. In the article, Gadsby provided a bit of insight into the cartoonist Jimmy Allen under the title, "Cartoonists Have Their Troubles Just Like You and I." And to quote, "Jimmy has learned that a little malicious caricature ends the ambitions of most of those who with faces like Stan Laurel would look like Gable through the courtesy of friend artists. As far as they are concerned, Jimmy has them beaten," end of quote. After only 15 months at the Standard, the newspaper's publisher took the bold step of trying to syndicate the work of his editorial cartoonist. In March 1940, a promotional package was circulated to newspaper publishers that included a cover letter and folder describing the proposed cartoon material. As well as showcasing cartoon examples, it also outlined a rate schedule, provided a biographical profile about James Allen. They were going to charge $3 a week, and the newspaper would be provided with 3 cartoons weekly. And you can see, just a quote from some of it, in times like these, you need brilliant, interpretive, timely cartoons that highlight the issues of the day. You need gripping editorials, distinctly Canadian in flavor. And again, he goes on to say, there's no other cartoon service in Canada and the United States that interprets the vital happenings of national import. So it appears that the Burgoynes, again, are on the cutting edge of something here to try to cater to the Canadian market with an editorial syndication. They go on, all subject of a controversial nature will be avoided. I'm not quite sure about that with editorial cartoons, how you manage that, but they had that in their promotional literature. And about the cartoonist, a brilliant and rising young cartoonist, James Allen has behind him several years of wide and varied experience in political and editorial cartooning. His cartoons appeared quite regularly in the Toronto Star, the Financial Post, and the Saturday Night. Unfortunately, details are unknown about the response by others to the paper's efforts to nationally syndicate the work of their editorial cartoonist. Kaell carried on with his usual editorial page subject matter, which was more broadly about Canada. Again, this is back in the late 30s. Here we have Western politicians' secession talks. He also talked about the Second World War and magnetic mines and war zones and just merchant marine here and problems. Again, much of it was very distinctly local. You can see this is strange bloom for a garden city. Fan apathy. Fans aren't going out to support. They had championship playing teams in the lacrosse athletics and the baseball transports and CYO. He also prepared regular cartoons that appeared on the sports pages. And here it looks like the good old St. Catharines Saints are down 2-3 to the Marlboros. And here's some of the other sport. 1939 is about to start. 1938, all the championships that they'd won, and old 1938 encouraging on the youngster 39. Kaell's talents were also put to use preparing the cover art for local sport programs, including ones for the 1940 St. Catharines Athletics lacrosse team and for the 1940-41 St. Catharines Senior Saints hockey team. Kaell left his position at the Standard in 1945 and returned to Toronto, where he continued to do illustration work for trade journals under the name James Allen. You see here this letter from Canadian Baker. It's dear Mr. Allen, not Mr. Kaell. He had cartoons published in Canadian Baker and in Motor magazine, both of which were part of the Consolidated Press group of magazines. Consolidated Press was also the publisher of Saturday Night, for whom Kaell had already been regularly doing work. Kaell was employed by the art department of the Toronto Daily Star doing mechanical art, such as retouching photographs. 5 years after leaving the Standard, Kaell would again be providing content for the newspaper. This time, however, it would be for a daily comic strip titled Dear Arthur. The strip was a collaborative effort between Kaell and his friend Sam Zimmerman, both of Toronto. Zimmerman and Kaell each had sons named Arthur, so it was an obvious title for the strip, and perhaps a subtle acknowledgement that their children may have been the inspiration for many of the storylines and gags in this children's comic strip. By the way, in that photo, these are their actual children, much younger. A glossy multi-page prospectus was prepared to help market the series. Testimonials and editorials inside the package seemed to bode well for the strip's potential for success. And you can see many of the ones that the accolades from the Globe and Mail. We've got the Rochester Democrat Chronicle, the Standard out of Montreal, it's Syracuse Herald, etc. The stated goal of the Dear Arthur series was to entertain and amuse readers, to provide an alternative to the violence and crime focus of many of the strips then being published. It is known that the Dear Arthur series was carried by at least 3 papers, the St. Catharines Standard, the Globe and Mail, and one of the Winnipeg newspapers. However, after 3 years of development and production, the Dear Arthur strip ran for only 23 weeks from January to June 1950. After the Dear Arthur comic strip series, Kaell ran the Robert Kaell Art Service in Toronto. He operated this commercial art firm until his death, 1961. Our next cartoonist, Harold Foley Marten, is the only one of the Standard's cartoonists who I do not believe was a regular staffer at the paper. He was more likely a freelancer submitting cartoons on speculation, or maybe at the special request or approval of the newspaper. Each cartoon showcased Marten's artistic and editorial capabilities, and given that there were over 100 published, they were obviously welcomed by the newspaper. Again, here we have democracies of the USSR, familiar. The Marten material spans the decade from 1941 through 1951 and overlaps the period of his predecessor cartoonist, Rubin Kaell, and his successor, Charles Pratt. Harold Foley Marten was born in Surrey, England in 1879. While he obviously had artistic talent and an interest in fine art, it is unknown if he had any formal art training. He immigrated to North America in 1902, and the first number of years had a variety of jobs in a variety of locations. Before eventually joining the staff of the Welland Ship Canal, he had been a laborer, farmer, and a grower of violets, and had lived in St. Catharines, Youngstown, New York, and latterly Cocoa, Florida. Securing a position as a draftsman on the canal construction in November 1913 would provide steady employment, as well as utilize his skills in precision drawing. Marten stayed with the Welland Ship Canal office until enlisting for the service in the First World War. He signed up on January 17, 1917. He was 37 at the time. It was surprising that he passed the physical because rheumatic fever in his childhood had left him with an enlarged heart and serious health issues. Marten served 2.5 years overseas in England and France as a sapper with the Canadian Engineers. By the way, this is drawn by Harold Marten, just wonderfully detailed work. After his demobilization in July 1919, Marten rejoined the engineering department of the ship canal. However, he did not remain long. He left for England in September 1920 and did not return to Canada until November of the following year. He was back in the employ of the government on the canal project sometime before 1929. Marten's meticulous drafting and cartographic skills were also in demand by other local firms. Some of those for whom he did work included the St. Catharines surveyor Douglas Ure, the engineering office of McKinnon Industries General Motors, this was during the Second World War, the government of Ontario, where he drew maps of the QEW, and the engineering department of the city of St. Catharines. He was still employed at the city at the time of his death in 1953. By the way, this photo is the official opening of the Welland, of the Queen Elizabeth Way. In addition to his QEW maps, Marten drew highly detailed maps to scale of the Welland Ship Canal and the city of St. Catharines. Marten became well known in the area for his artistic ability. He excelled in creating illuminated scrolls, not only for presentation in Ontario, but on 3 occasions in honor of members of the royal family when they visited Canada. An example of one of these hangs in the historic courthouse in Niagara-on-the-Lake. In 1924, Harold married Winifred Clara Reed, and they had 2 children, Mary and Harold Jr. After the death of Winnie's mother, they moved to the Reed family farm on Lakeshore Road West near Port Dalhousie. You see here, Mayor Ross is now dragging old Port Dalhousie out of its village status into a town status. They took up farming on this piece of prime agricultural land, which was originally a UEL land grant. Marten seems to have started his standard cartooning about the time that they moved from St. Catharines to the farm. One of Marten's best early illustrations was published in the Globe in November 1933. It draws attention to the plight of workers losing their jobs at the conclusion of construction of the Welland Ship Canal, with the hope that the next stage, the operations phase, would be able to take on some of those who had been set adrift in a sea of unemployment. According to a biographical narrative prepared by his daughter, Mary Shoplin, and this is to quote, "He got a kick out of doing cartoons and seeing them published in the St. Catharines Standard. He was always interested in world events, as well as local and national happenings. He did worry about the war and world affairs in general, and could become quite incensed regarding values and priorities. I remember well his intolerance for apathy, laziness, coarseness, sarcasm, thoughtlessness, and selfishness. Again, just to digress for a moment here, this is another example of this clever illustration work when they're going to redo the front facade of the Standard. And here, the old Standard building's in for a makeover. And here comes the beautiful new Standard building. You see the purse, HBB, HB Burgoyne, and the beauty specialists are Newman Brothers. Well, here I am again, new women. Now I feel more like the Queen on Standard Street instead of the Standard on Queen Street. Marten seems to have been well suited for an interest in cartooning as a means of drawing attention to the ills of society and the problems facing the world. By the way, there's that new facade at the Standard. In addition to his large body of work in editorial cartooning, Marten has left a wonderful visual legacy of illuminated manuscripts, calligraphy, precision pen and ink drawings, paintings, and cartographic maps and plans. On January 19th, 1953, Harold Marten was at the barber's telling him a joke when he suddenly slumped over. His death was instant. He was 74. Charles Henry Pratt was born in London, England on April 24th, 1923, one of 4 children who would eventually all immigrate to Canada, along with their parents, William Alexander Pratt and Mary Elizabeth Heath. If he had plans in his youth related to art studies, they were surely interrupted by the Second World War. You can see here, this is another familiar figure that many of the cartoonists use, Mars, the god of war and working up troubles in Germany and Egypt and Pakistan, Korea. Pratt was a 16-and-a-half-year-old reservist in the British Army when war broke out. Apparently, he lied about his age and on June 10th, 1940, enlisted with the Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment. Pratt went on to serve 6 years in many of the war's hotspots, North Africa, Italy, and Germany. He was hit 9 times by fragments of one type or another. For not dodging bullets, his interest in illustration appears to have continued. Upon Victory in Europe Day, he did a drawing about the Allies' VE Day triumph, which you see here in the picture being held by the Sechelt BC president, Bill McLean. The drawing also emphasized the fact that there was still an ongoing fight against the Japanese in the Pacific. Those are Pratt's medals there, by the way. Also, while in the armed forces, he did drawings under the moniker Beans. Pratt prepared an illustrated multi-page demobilization calendar for soldiers. They could use it to count down the days until their discharge. This was published in 1946 as part of Parade magazine, a journal of the mobile unit of the British Central Mediterranean Forces in Italy. Pratt's work at newspapers had a foundation long before coming to Canada. He had some experience at the Kent Mercury and the London Evening News, along with a post-war position as a general reporter with the Reuters news agency in Europe. Pratt arrived in Canada on August 10, 1947. By December, he found himself in Hamilton, Ontario, working for the Hamilton News, though he does not appear to have stayed there very long. For about 3 years, from 1948 through 1950, Pratt served as a reporter, photographer, cartoonist, and engraver at the Prince Albert Daily Herald in Saskatchewan. Apparently, he intentionally sought out a smaller paper where he would be exposed to a wider variety of tasks, thereby leading to a broader range of experiences in the newspaper business. While in the West, Pratt resurrected his Beans character for a series of illustrations in Prairie Transport magazine. In Prince Albert, Charles met and married Margaret Sutherland, the daughter of Scottish parents who had settled in Canada in 1912 and 13. Charles and Margaret had a son, David, born in Prince Albert in June of 49. At the time, Prince Albert was a modest-sized community of about 15,000. At almost 38,000, St. Catharines is more than double the size of Prince Albert and would likely present even greater opportunities for the talents of Pratt. By the way, this last cartoon talking about the Seaway outlet, and Canada's trying to encourage along the US congressmen and senators to reach a decision. As in Prince Albert, Pratt wore a variety of hats. At the Standard, he was a general reporter, photographer, and cartoonist, along with undertaking some editorial page duties. So of the 6 cartoonists, the first 2 and the last 2, they were solely, that was their whole job as a staff cartoonist artist. And the middle 2, Marten, I think was a freelancer, and Pratt, you can see, undertook, he had 3 different roles at the paper. While here, some of his feature articles included stories about the game of conkers, reserve gunner training, and a 3-part series about a weekend visit to New York City by a group from the St. Catharines YMCA. Though not here long, Pratt probably did over 100 cartoons in addition to his reporting and photography duties. The Pratts remained in St. Catharines from about October 1950 until November 51, when they returned to Saskatchewan at the request of a Prince Albert businessman. You can see here the Central Fire Hall, and I guess you're trying to get these billboards removed. Margaret became manager and buyer for that gentleman's ladies' wear store in Prince Albert. And after a move to Moose Jaw, another store there. And you can see here, this must be the lead up to the establishment of the Penn Center. This way is to the shopping center of Niagara Peninsula. And so if someone's having to make a choice, do you want to go to this, where the shops are or where we can park? In the 1970s in Regina, Margaret owned and operated her own store, Margie's Fashions. The shop was set up with the assistance of her then ex-husband, Charles Pratt. Charles worked for the Saskatoon Star Phoenix from 1951 to 1955 while still living in Prince Albert. Again, he had multiple responsibilities as a reporter, photographer, and cartoonist. He covered northern affairs in Saskatchewan, including mining issues and matters pertaining to Prince Albert. Commencing in 1954 in Prince Albert, Pratt became active politically. He was initially interested in municipal politics and later in the Liberal Party federally. It was difficult for a Liberal in that part of Saskatchewan starting in the early 1950s, especially as it became Diefenbaker country. John Diefenbaker was Prince Albert's Member of Parliament from 1953 through 1979 and Canada's 13th Prime Minister between 1957 and 1963. You can see here, by the way, on this ballot, the only time 2 future prime ministers would be running against one another. The Diefenbaker era gave Pratt the opportunity to once again engage in political cartooning. And I just love this. You can see this rickety conservative platform strung together here and a milking stool propping up one corner. This time, Diefenbaker would be held to account in a series of 4 well-worded and Pratt-illustrated vignettes interpreting the perceived failings of Diefenbaker and his policies. They are all classic illustrations of political cartooning with their exaggerated caricatures, clear message, and satirical look at their conservative opponent, who, by the way, Diefenbaker won by a landslide. After leaving the Star Phoenix in 1955, Pratt worked for different private companies and public agencies. His last position was in Ottawa, then Vancouver, as manager of planning, advertising, marketing, and research for Transport Canada. Pratt married Joan Palmer Tuttle Black in Ottawa, where they enjoyed an active life. In 1986, they moved to Sechelt, BC, and about 4 years later, Pratt retired from Transport Canada. Pratt became very involved in the community as a director of the Festival of the Written Arts and served on various committees of the Sechelt branch of the Royal Canadian Legion. Later in life, Pratt began to pick up on painting, working in oils, acrylics, watercolors, and other mediums. He died in Sechelt on September 21st, 2003, age 80. Our 5th cartoonist, John Rayburn Ednie, was born February 29th, 1920 in Fife, Scotland, to Alexander Hailstones Ednie and Sarah McGranathan Hughes. The family of 3 immigrated to Canada, arriving at Halifax on April 10th, 1921. 2 other sons were born in Canada, Robert in 1922 and Alexander in 1923, both in Niagara-on-the-Lake. In Scotland, John's father was a miner. Moving to Canada, they were heading to his brother-in-law's, Duncan Robertson, in Niagara-on-the-Lake. While he farmed at first, for most of his working life until retirement, Alexander Ednie was employed on the canal in various capacities. The family home was formerly a heritage lock tender's house, built of stone about 1850. It It was located in Marten, immediately adjacent to the line of the old Second Welland Canal where it climbed the escarpment. John Ednie was interested in art from his youth. Still surviving almost a century later on a basement wall of the old lock tender's house is a painting of an East Indian. The figure staring back was a portrait done by a young Johnny Ednie. Here's the current owner of the house, Bill Jones, and while he repainted the whole basement, he left that particular painting and even went so far as to put a frame around it. All three Ednie brothers served in the Second World War. John is shown here in North Africa. Robert was killed in action in Belgium in September 1944 while serving with the Royal Regiment of Canada. He is commemorated on the Marten cenotaph. Alexander Ednie served in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Ednie returned from the war in about 1947, enrolled at the Ontario College of Art in Toronto in their 3-year drawing and painting program. It would also be at college that he would meet his future wife, Simie Elaine Freeman, a student in the fashion design program. They married about 1950 and would have 4 children, a couple of whom would share their father's creative talents. In December 1952, Ednie was hired as the artist cartoonist replacement for Charles Pratt, who had returned to Saskatchewan in late 1951. Ednie would remain at the position for the next 4 years. Ednie's formal art training and professional career in art were evident in his finely drawn cartoons. When he began the editorial cartoons series, Ednie used a couple of characters, Josh and Hiram, to deliver the messages and punchlines. As time went on, while they would reappear, Ednie's style changed to a more traditional way of delivering the editorial page messages. Ednie was a valued part of more than just the editorial page. He also illustrated cartoons that appeared in other parts of the newspaper. Ednie's Peak of the Week showcased local events and issues over the previous week, whereas Viewing the News was more of a broad cross-section of national and world news. After the Standard, in 1956, the Ednie family moved to Winnipeg, where John Ednie worked for Phillips, Gutkin and Associates, also known as PGA. PGA was formed in 1952 and was a leader in animation in Canada. Ednie was one of 25 or 30 animators doing art for animated cartoons for commercials. This Homer bottleneck, by the way, crosses over on different ones of the editorial cartoonists. It was a long, standing battle to get to the bottleneck fixed. The period between 1954 and 1960, about when Ednie was there, was considered the golden age for the PGA business. They were making between 15 and 30 commercials a month for major clients, such as Esso Oil, Chrysler Canada, Windsor Salt, Kellogg's Cereals, Kraft Foods, and many more. Unfortunately, the PGA business began to struggle in the field of animation when live action could be done at 1/10 of the cost. Ednie left PGA and in 1963 was working in Peterborough as a commercial artist. From 1964 to 1968, he was a commercial artist in Hamilton. By 1972, Ednie and his wife had separated, and Ednie was back in St. Catharines. He lived with his parents at the family home in Marten. His occupation on voters' lists is given as cartoonist, but it is not known for whom work was being produced. He did make an attempt at a comic, Mr. Bean, and an illustrated cartoon called Somebody's Cat. These do not appear to have been commercially published. Ednie would always carry a sketchbook and quickly draw any figure that he found of interest. His art also included oil painting. This picture here is at Hallett's Union House in Marten, and you can see, I'm sure those are regular people that were patrons there. Ednie died in 1975, age 55, 2 years after his mother and a year before his father's passing. The last of the artist cartoonists at the Standard was Harry George Harley. Harley grew up in a home where they put high value on the arts. Every Saturday at the Harley home on James Street in St. Catharines, the 4 children would devote their time to drawing and writing activities. They became quite adept to the point that all of the children had a gift for creativity. Early on, Harry was already trying his hand at comics. In the mid-1950s, Harley did 4 or 6 color strip cartoons that his older brother Rogers had mounted. About the early 1960s, the 3 Harley brothers prepared a joint submission for a cartooning contest. The strip was titled The Adventures of Our Gang. The family home at 185 James Street was built by Harry Sr. Harry Jr. created a basement studio in a former fruit cellar. You can see it here. He painted the rocky stone foundation with aluminum paint and had the space outfitted with an illustration table. Harry Harley was born February 22nd, 1929 in St. Catharines. The only one of our local editorial cartoonists who was born here, though Ednie was raised here most of his life. 1951, Harley married Judy Sherwood and they had 4 sons, Hal, Matt, Jonathan, and Kit, 2 of whom are also artists. Harley's employment at the Standard would last a little over 4 years. His first cartoon appeared on November 26, 1956. As a young boy, Harley's son Hal would go up to the Standard with his father. He recalled him having his own drawing desk and a light table beside the darkroom, likely for retouching photographs. This would be done before the photos went to the engraving department. You can see here when they're talking about bringing tolls in during this period on the canal and what a bottleneck it would stop people from using the canal. After a quarter of a century of having their own illustrator, the era of a staff cartoonist would come to an end at the Standard. Apparently, the Standard had abandoned its goal to syndicate the work of their cartoonists as well as that of their regular columnists. The last cartoon by the last of their staff cartoonists, Harry Harley, appeared in the paper on January 31st, 1961. All through his employment at the Standard, Harley was submitting material for consideration by other periodicals. Freelance work for magazines would now become his main source of income. His children recall accompanying their father to the Church Street post office, where he regularly sent off his latest illustrations. He would send them in batches of 10 or 15 examples, all on spec. To make deliveries for payment, he drove to Toronto weekly from their home in St. Catharines, then later when they'd moved to Fonthill, and lastly from Grimsby. Payment would be either on acceptance or on publication. Once purchased, the cartoons became the property of the magazine. While in Toronto, Harley would also visit other editors for possible commissions. Harley developed an alpha system with a rubber stamp that he stamped on the backs of the cartoon art. Using a series of dots, it would aid him in tracking to whom a specific cartoon had already been submitted for consideration. You can see that system in use right here, 3 dots on it. MacLean Hunter Publishing was an important source of income for many Canadian illustrators, such as Harry Harley, Josh Silburt, and Rubin Kaell. This Canadian company published over 130 special interest and consumer magazines and 70 business journals. Harley had cartoons published in Maclean's magazine, as well as some of the MacLean Hunter Publishing Group's trade journals, such as Modern Power and Engineering and Powder Coatings. Some of his cartoons appeared in other print media, including the New York Times, Better Homes and Gardens, and Look magazine. Harley would often provide the little graphic inserts to accompany the main story in a magazine. Over time, he used 2 or 3 different styles. When the trend in comics evolved to a simpler illustration technique, such as in Peanuts or BC, Harley too changed his style to remain relevant. From at least 1967 through until his death in 1971, Harley's distinctive style of cartoons was a regular feature on the pages of the Financial Post. As for Harley's public presence beyond his editorial cartoons, a couple of times Harley went to local press club dinners in St. Catharines and presented his version of Chalk Talks. Press club met upstairs from the old Peninsula Press building on Ontario Street. The Allen Gallery in Hamilton showcased an exhibition of Harley's work in the fall of 1971. His son Matt helped him mount and hang the show. Harley put a lot of effort into the exhibition, even preparing a special announcement that was quite clever. The panel to the left was the first thing visible when removed from the envelope. The letters of the flyer were meticulously documented so that all 3 panels had the exact same sizes and styles and numbers of letters. When opened to panel number 2, the letters were given a boisterous kick by the illustrated artist, thereby spelling out a description of the show and its artist that appears on panel number 3. Harley submitted cartoons for the Expo 67 and 68 International Pavilion of Humor at Man and His World in Montreal, and had cartoons published in the International Salon of Cartoons in 1968 and 1970. Harley struggled with diabetes all of his life and died in Grimsby in 1971. He was only 42. In closing, editorial cartoonists have developed a strong following, and their work has become appreciated as an art form, celebrated as popular culture, and studied in political science. Museums of cartooning have been established, archives actively seek new acquisitions, associations have been created and websites developed, and cartooning conferences held. Cartoons and comics have become highly collectible. Cartooning is also being recognized at the university level in Canada. There are major collections at Simon Fraser University, Ryerson University, and Brock University. Furthermore, Library and Archives Canada has major holdings of cartoon and comic material. In the United States and internationally, many other universities and other institutions and organizations have identified the public media of cartoons and comics as important for preservation, study, and exhibition. In this regard, the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum at Hawaii State University stands out amongst all others worldwide. Worthwhile taking a look at their website if you get a chance. Most recently, a 2021 postage stamp series from Canada Post honored 5 of the greats in Canadian cartooning: Serge Chapleau, Brian Gable, Bruce McKinnon, Duncan McPherson, and Terry Mosher, aka Aislinn. Hopefully this will become an ongoing series because there are many other talented Canadian cartoonists, such as J.W. Bengo, who I mentioned earlier on, who are deserving of recognition. While the careers of our 6 local cartoonists were on a different trajectory than the prominent individuals honored by Canada Post, it is hoped that this modest profile will in one way help to preserve their stories as a part of Canada's editorial cartooning history. I would like to also mention that I'll be doing an adjunct presentation to this one. It's sort of a cartooning part 2. It's going to be an in-person meeting at the L.R. Wilson Heritage Research Archives in Port Colborne, which is right beside the Port Colborne Museum. That's on Thursday, November 24th at 7 p.m. And this illustrated talk will cover 175 years of cartooning history related to several communities in Niagara, including Port Colborne, Welland, Grimsby, and St. Catharines. Showcase the work of different cartoonists, as well as the 6 standard staffers whose work has been the focus of this whole presentation. Here are some of the work of the 19th century cartoonists that will be a particular feature of the show, particularly William Osborne. This is a pretty amazing piece that I'll leave until November to tell you about. This presentation would not have happened without tremendous assistance of a lot of people. Special thanks to the Historical Society for hosting this, and to the many, many organizations and individuals. I've had learned to understand much of the cartooning from staffers like Kevin Cavanaugh and Standard. Thanks so much. From the families, Alan Silburt and Josh Kaell and Arthur Zimmerman, Harold and Carol Marten, especially about Harold Sr., Heather Harmony O'Hara, Valerie McLean, Hal Harley, Matt Harley, Kurt Harley. Thanks especially all of you folks, David Pratt and Laurie Ide. Anyhow, just many, many people have had a part in this presentation, and I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you very much. And a big shout out to Dennis Gannon, who all of these projects, Dennis is there from start to finish and helped with research and contacts and photos and marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are aware of other Niagara cartoonists or cartoon material out there, I'd appreciate learning of them. And now would like to open it up for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Dave Miller. I'm the president. Normally, Art and I open up the meeting. Unfortunately, I had technical problems logging in today, so I was a little late joining. But just for any questions, I mean, does anyone have anything? If you can virtually put up your hand virtually, I can see that. If not, there was one question.
Which one?
From Gail, and she was asking. It says Says, I adore cartoonists and collect books on same, so very interested in the presentation. My collection includes so many famous men in Britain and Canada, none are women. Are you aware of any female cartoonists?
Female cartoonists.
No, yeah.
Well, not editorial cartoonists, but of course from Niagara we have Sandra Bell Lundy, who is the creator of the Between Friends comic strip. So, and I will be showcasing Sandra as part of my November presentation.
Okay, thank you. And just a few other comments there. Wonderful presentation, fabulous presentation, fantastic presentation. You get the hint there, but a lot of good comments there. For
You got all my comments there, did you? That's all.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely a lot of good stuff coming in there. Did anyone else have anything, any other questions? Like I said, if you put up your virtual hand, I can see, and I think that's it.
I have
Elizabeth.
one.
Yeah.
Just one thing I want to say, and that is this was wonderful, Arden, and there was so much information. And John Britton, I'm sure you're going to put this on YouTube so we can watch it again and maybe spend a little more time looking at some of the cartoons and listening to some of the comments, because there's a lot to take in.
Yes, it'll be going up on YouTube at some point in the weekend.
Good, good.
And I can, you just go to the Historical Society of St. Catharines YouTube channel. So you can just do a Google search on that, and then find Arden's presentation there. And if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll get an automatic announcement when the video is published.
In the presentation, I know I packed a lot in there, and my apologies to everybody for the sensory overload of listening to me, as well as the quick editorial cartoons there. So it'd be a good idea if you can watch it on YouTube and you can pause. This is just a small portion. I've copied probably 400 or 500 of the cartoons from these individuals. So there's a lot of material out there, and I haven't, as I mentioned early on, I haven't systematically gone through day by day and copied everything. So there's a lot more to be found.
And I just want to point out that Alan Silburt is on the meeting, and he has shared a link in the chat, a collection of Silburt cartoons, joshsilburt.com, A Colorful Life. So if you want to go through your chat, and you can click on that link and go see some examples of the cartoons.
It's a great website that Alan's put together. He's done a wonderful job of showcasing his father through the book. He's done exhibitions, he's done presentations, the website, and really each one of these 6 editorial cartoonists deserves the same sort of treatment. So hopefully someone else down the road can pick up the torch with these other individuals. I hope to at least get some of this material submitted for consideration by some of the Canadian cartooning websites that are out there, because you Google any of their names, and other than one site with a Harry Harley entry, that's the only brief entry you come up on Googling their names. So we hope to correct that.
Can I speak, John Brenton?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep, okay, my hand up there. Somebody asked me what period did I collect books on? Actually, from Hogarth on. I'm trying to remember the one that I can't remember, but my most recent purchase was Duncan Macpherson. There's a brilliant book on Duncan Macpherson. And I also have a book with Gable cartoons that I bought just about 3 or 4 months ago from Warren Clemens. So yeah, I do collect actually cartoonist books because I'm a failed cartoonist myself. But thank you so much for a good talk. It was very interesting.
Most of the mainstream editorial cartoonists have books published. There is a lot of material out there, so you can find Tingley out of the London Free Press, or Bob Bierman out in BC. I mean, there's a lot of material. There's also, I mean, there are some very good books. The Portfolio series that used to be published every year for a couple of decades. there's a lot of good material if you want to study Canadian cartooning in greater detail.
The Duncan McPherson one is just a brilliant book.
Yeah.
Look for it. Okay,
One of the giants of cartooning for sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
Dennis?
Yes, Arden, I'm kind of curious to know if you've come across any reason why the Standard backed away from having editorial cartoonists, has backed away from that for the past 50 years.
I don't know why. I know at the time in '61 that Harry Harley had been advised that they'd given up on the thought of syndicating their work of the editorial cartoonists, not just the editorial cartoonists, but apparently columnists they were also trying to syndicate. Why they haven't had that position still, I don't know. They did other artistic work at the Standard, and they were closely associated with the photography department. So for sure they were doing negative and photo retouching and all that sort of thing with their artistic skills. And who was doing that after they left? You know, I don't really know.
Okay, thanks.
Last question, and Arden, I think you've already answered some of this, is can you speak to where these comics will be archived?
Where they will be the research?
Yeah, so it just says, can you speak to where these comics will be archived?
Like the content that I was talking about, where I hope to get it published,
Sure,
or where it's submitted after. There's a illustration website. There's a couple of different illustration websites. The names of which I've got I don't have the exact names handy.
Okay, that's fine.
And there's another one called Sequential. So I hope to submit this material and see if they would either publish the bios or a brief bio or some of the cartoon material at least.
Yeah, definitely. I can keep us up to date, maybe something we can mention in a subsequent meeting or a newsletter. But seems to be a lot of interest there. Just going to look and see if there's any other
I was
question.
Oh,
Go on.
sorry.
Oh, Ellen Silburt.
Yeah, sorry, I had a hard time figuring out how to raise my hand.
Okay.
I just, I just wanted to acknowledge what a great service that Arden has done to the families and to the careers, the memories of these wonderful artists. Arden has been really diligent in his research and thorough and energetic and inspirational. So I just want to extend a thanks to Arden.
Oh, it's been a project of pleasure, believe me. I've always been interested in editorial cartooning, and it's been great getting introduced to the different families. And yourself and everybody has just really gone above and beyond to be of assistance, as you can tell from the content of the presentation, both visually and the written content. So.
Yeah, I think that's about it. But anyways, Arden, yeah, as I just read to you some of the comments, obviously there's a lot of people who were, very impressed with your presentation. So I want to thank you just on my end, looks like a very well researched, very informative. And yeah, it's really dealing with, unfortunately, really a vanishing type of art, but you don't see as much anymore. So I think it's very important we talk about these things, and then all good presentation all around. And on my end, again, I apologize for not being there at my usual time to open the meeting. The technology works great until it doesn't, but it's probably me. It's probably me's the one who messed up on it. But anyways, here I am. So anyways, thank you very much. And one thing I just wanted to say as a message to all of our members, our next meeting again will be the fourth Thursday in October 27. It's called Covered Histories, and the title of it is Victoria Lawn, Underground Railroad Gravestones. Rochelle Bush, one of our directors, and Dr. Adam Montgomery will present their work on locating graves of freedom seekers, members of the Fugitive Aid Society, and others in Victoria Lawn Cemetery. So we hope to see everyone there for that presentation. And again, for those of you who are interested and are not yet members, we encourage everyone to take out a member. It's the membership which keeps this organization going. So on that note, I will see hopefully everyone next month. Thank you and bye now.
Thank you.